So our next speaker is going to be Donna Dodson. She is the Chief Cybersecurity Advisor at NIST.
Good, we can stop there.
Okay. She is, you've been named one of DC's top 50 cybersecurity experts, top 10 Okay, I'll stop there. But she's been at NIST since 1987, and I'm really excited to hear her talk today. Thank you.
So thank you all very much. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I typically do with one of my talks. So first of all, he gave away my age, but I really started at NIST when I was about 5 years old, which is not true. But over the years in cybersecurity, I have witnessed two things that I think really are areas that we collectively need to address. And the first one is cybersecurity people are great at talking to other cybersecurity people. We are wonderful at that, and we get into the details, and we get into the what, and then we get into the how, but we never really talk about the why. Why does this matter? Why do we care? How do we put this in plain language? The second one is, I've been at NIST since 1987. NIST is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And over the years, as I've moved out from just simply doing research to doing some more strategic planning and some more management at NIST, I've really come to embrace the national economic perspective of cybersecurity. And I think very often we tackle the challenges in cybersecurity as if they're national defense kinds of questions. Now, let me be very clear. I think the national defense side is really important. But I think the national economic side is equally important, and sometimes we lose that part of the equation. And we have an opportunity right now to make a very, very big difference. 20 years ago, when IT was just beginning its massive growth of internet, of interconnectivity, of re-energizing information and data as it flows, we didn't think much about cybersecurity. We hear that fairly often, that, you know, in the 30 years ago, 35 years ago, with the onset of the internet, they said, yeah, but nobody would ever want to do that. So there was a big focus on networks and how fast you could make things go and how efficient you could make protocols, etc., but not as much about cybersecurity. I believe that we are in a very changing world today when we think about Internet of Things and cyber-physical systems. And we have an opportunity to do something that we didn't think as much about when it was sort of the IT explosion. And I think the innovations that we're seeing today are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of cyber-physical systems and the opportunities to improve cybersecurity across the IT space, but also across the cyber-physical systems space, is something that we can grasp that right now. In order to do that, we all have a role to play. And as I was thinking about my talk and I was asked to come and speak, I was actually thinking about some of the students being in the room, because I've had a great opportunity to be at University of Connecticut at CyberSEED a couple of times and had a chance to talk to the students. And really, I wanted to think about some of those motivations that we need to consider in our role, whether we're private sector, whether we're academic, or whether we're public sector, and bring those together. And I think at NIST, we think about that a lot today, even more than we did 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, actually, when we ran the first competition, for the data encryption standard. Brian is part of our NIST family because he was there for a couple of summers. So, came just after the data encryption standard, but that was actually done through this realm of a competition where we have the public sector, the private sector, we have academia all working together for the common good. So as I think about public-private partnerships, and that word gets used a lot, but what does it really mean in this space? And very often we think about public-private partnerships as characterized by a long-term contract with the private sector given by typically the government for a public good. And when I think about cybersecurity, I wonder, does this model really work in that aspect? Certainly protecting the digital infrastructure today is needed for the public good, for our national economy, for our national defense. So we kind of get a check mark there. Industry, government, and academia all have roles, so we get a check mark there. But I'm not sure if we have the right social contract in place today to really address the challenges that we have. And when I think about that, I think that the challenge occurs because innovation, rapid change, and evolving business models are really driving a lot of the work that we do in cybersecurity. And do we have a business model that actually can address that? NIST is more committed today than ever before to support this public-private partnership to address the innovation, to address the rapid change, to address the evolving business models that come out of that. And we do that in a number of ways. So we have standards, guidelines, tools, and metrics. We do through our National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. We do work on cybersecurity education and workforce development. And we do standards-based cybersecurity blueprints. Our whole, why do we do this? Why? NIST has some statutory responsibilities to support the US government and its cybersecurity posture, but everything we do in concert with academia and with industry. And we do that to ensure that cybersecurity creates trust. So when we think about the work that, when I think about the work that NIST is doing, we have a number of technical programs, and sometimes when I'm asked to come up here and speak now with, sometimes I will focus on a particular program, and today I'm going to highlight 3 programs in particular that we're working on. But our research areas, so those standards, tests, and metrics, we're looking at in a number of areas: identity management, including authentication, access control, and biometrics. Brian talked a lot about our work in post-quantum cryptography, but at the same time, we are also thinking about cryptography for the Internet of Things and that lightweight aspect of things, when you think about post-quantum crypto and you think about these really small devices like sensors and large key sizes and that sort of thing, it almost feels like an intractable problem. It almost feels like an intractable problem. However, when we invite the collective to be able to participate from around the world, and Brian and I were just talking, and originally when NIST was looking at our current project in post-quantum, we were expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 submissions, and we're thinking now that that number is a little low. Like we'll probably get double. And Brian's laughing because he's saying, no, it may even be more than 60 submissions. But that's how we create that innovation for tomorrow, and we begin to address post-quantum cryptography and think about it not just for our IT space, but also for our IoT space. At NIST, in our research program, we are not just thinking about today, but we are trying to project tomorrow. So again, I'm going to use the post-quantum as an example. We started work in the community, not just NIST, but the community started work in asymmetric cryptography in the 1970s. So around 1977, some of the RSA algorithms, El Gamal, et cetera, came out. And yet, it wasn't until the mid-90s that we had a key management infrastructure that supports those public key algorithms and really made use of them. And frankly, in my mind, we still haven't gotten PKI right today, as we saw with some of the RPKI talks. So if you think about post-quantum cryptography coming in 10 years, we have to get an algorithm out there and deployed, but that's the small part of the problem. The bigger part came with the question that we heard at the end of Brian's talk. What will this do to the internet infrastructure? How do you create that key management infrastructure and make those changes in such a broad area? So if you think PKI took 20 years to even get started after we had asymmetric key algorithms, you can think about a long time span for this as well. So some of our research problems at NIST, where we work with industry and academia, do have that very long view. We're doing a lot of work in privacy today. Why? We've heard lots of discussions in the previous, some of our previous speakers today have talked about all the data that's out there. And how do we begin to take really good privacy principles that have been generated and enact them? And this is yet another case where we have trouble speaking the same language. So the privacy experts and policymakers who came up with some of the privacy principles will sit down and talk with IT engineers, and they'll say, well, let's take these principles and realize them in a practical way. And the engineers say, I don't understand what any of those words mean up there. Give me some bits and bytes or an algorithm to work with. I'm good, but I don't get that. So our work in privacy engineering is there to start to build the appropriate layers so we can take the policy and implement it into practice. Another area that I want to spend a couple of minutes on is software quality. I was very fortunate. I became a NIST fellow, and I really need to take that title and divide it up among all the great people I get to work with every day at NIST, and each one of them gets to be a fellow for the day, and then once a year is up, we'll cycle through it again, because I didn't earn that. It's working with these great people. But on software quality, some of my colleagues and I have been thinking, not just technically, what do we need to do here to get out of vulnerability and patching and kind of the downstream problem, but how do you address the upstream problem? What are the tools that are commonly used when we're writing code today? And how do you have some notion on the provenance of those tools, so that if we get better tools out there that people are using, over time we should end up with higher quality code. Another aspect of software quality that we've been thinking about is that there's been some really great work, and Brian and I have not talked to each other in almost a year, so this is not shout outs for the great things that Microsoft is doing, but Microsoft did a lot of work on a secure software development lifecycle, and then there have been a number of companies in Silicon Valley who have gotten together and taken that model and really built it up and improved it. How many of you all in this room, when you buy things, ask any questions about the provenance of the development of that software service or that software product that you're buying? So we had something created, but the demand and the educated consumer side is missing there. So people look at what's the bottom line cost on this and made a decision. And actually today, consumers who are buying these products and services, and when I use the word consumers, I'm not just suggesting that it's about a home user, but organizations are not necessarily giving credit to companies who think about software quality. And I believe we need to change this model. And I believe that NIST can work with industry, both the developers of those products and services, but also the consumer side, to think about what kinds of evidence can be created so that you have more confidence in the quality of those software goods and services that are being used. And then the next project that I want to spend just a couple quick minutes on is usability and security. As we are building cybersecurity solutions, we really need to think about the end user as part of the system. We need to concentrate on making it easy to do the right thing, hard to do the wrong thing, and easy to back up if you do the wrong thing. Now, my roots are in cryptography and key management. That's where I started at NIST back in 1987, working in that space. I did a lot of public key infrastructure standards. I can remember hosting meetings at NIST to come up with what happens when something goes wrong with a certificate, if it's no longer valid, if there's a problem with the CA, et cetera, and creating a list of interoperable reason codes that could help security engineers diagnose a problem with the public key infrastructure or their use of public key infrastructure technology. Every time I see at home on my screen, certificate not valid, or certificate has expired, what do you want to do? I think, what have I done? I have incentivized bad behavior to end users. I'm not going to ask you all, have you ever clicked through when you get that certificate warning and it's it's a week before somebody's birthday and you realize you have no time to buy a gift if you can't order it online, and you found what you want to buy and you found how much money you're willing to pay, and you all are cybersecurity people. What do we expect of end users? So if we don't bring them into the model, and if our models don't start thinking not just about what the perfect system is, but the edge use cases on what happens if something goes wrong, we are going to be back and in deeper problems in cybersecurity in 10 years than we have today because of the advances of that communications infrastructure and it touching a slice of our life 20 years ago, and absolutely everything that we do all day long 10 years from now. So the next thing I wanted to do was just spend a couple of minutes on some key program areas where we, NIST, have established strong public-private partnerships working with organizations, frankly, that NIST has never worked with in the past in our IT programs, and give you a little update on those. So a couple of years ago, we were asked by the previous administration, and later on it was put into statute, to develop a framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. And it needed to be done in collaboration with industry, and the idea was to use existing standards and best practices. And what we realized from some of our previous work, again, was that gap between cybersecurity folks in an organization and the organization as a whole. So this framework identifies 5 high-level steps of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And from those 5 areas of resiliency and risk management in cybersecurity, you can have conversations with the very head of the organization all the way down to the bits and bytes folks, for program managers, for individuals in an organization to see why cybersecurity is important and how it affects them, and gives them a common language to be able to use. So we have seen some data from others that the framework has been adopted by about 30% of the organizations around the country. It's not designed for large organizations or only small organizations. It's not designed for IT organizations in particularly, but it works in all of those communities, small businesses, large businesses. We have some example use cases on how organizations are using the framework. And it's brought us even closer to a public-private partnership. I got an email just the other day from a large pizza company that does a lot of franchises. And they said, hey, we picked up this cybersecurity framework because we've had these kinds of issues. And they were pretty candid with us about their issues in email. But we want to start collaborating more with you, NIST, because we need to improve our cybersecurity posture, not just in our headquarters, but with our franchises. And the framework has really helped us with that, and we want to go deeper. So that framework has started a national conversation where good business is good cybersecurity, and good cybersecurity is good business. I'm not going to talk anymore about cryptography. We've done a lot of work on mobility and cloud and security. We are seeing a transition across the compute platform today where you have cloud, you have software-defined networks, and you have endpoints, as compared with the way that we operated 10 years ago. And because of that shift, our cybersecurity model has to shift. So we're doing some things on a trusted cloud stack. We've done a lot of work in mobile device security and threat management. And we're doing a lot in security and Internet of Things. A place where a good bit of this comes together is at our National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is a different model for NIST. How many people are familiar with our 800 series? Number of hands go up. Okay. So at NIST, getting back on my tangent of business and cybersecurity, I started a new program, and we have a new series out. It's an 1800 series, because we like our numbers at NIST. But really, our 1800 series start out with business problems, business challenges. We're doing some work in healthcare. So we did an IoT-based activity where we brought in a number of hospitals and all the major wireless infusion pump producers. And we looked at how do you secure that environment, not just the wireless infusion pump, but the environment that it's going in. And we provided practical guidance on how to implement standards and best practices that can be picked up and used by healthcare providers. And it demonstrates with a number of partners who come in and work with us all the time who have real-world products and services. So we have infusion pumps running today that have an authentication capability. They have some data protections around, including cryptography, but not only cryptography. We developed a software-defined network boundary for that data, and a lot of things that weren't often used in healthcare environments. We're doing some fundamental building blocks right now, too. So secure email, and what does that look like? And how can I set that up and manage configurations with out-of-the-box software that meets many of the Internet Engineering Task Force standards? We're doing a long look at TLS 1.3 and some of the challenges that people have when they're really trying to implement it in an operational environment, and the world of perfect with the world of I've got to get it done comes together. So we're working with transportation, healthcare, energy, financial services, hospitality, and looking at both the restaurants and how they're managing data, as well as hotels, et cetera. So these people are coming together to collaborate with the whole notion of making sure cybersecurity puts more trust in our digital infrastructure. I have 1 second left, and my ask of every person in this room is to think about what are you doing to contribute to that strong, secure digital infrastructure, and how can you share that with others so that we do continue to have a strong economy as our economy moves to bits and bytes only, as well as every aspect of our life, because it matters to all of us. And with that, I'm finished. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience?
Do you make the slides available? Because the most important things are the resources at the end, like Brian, so.
So Donna, first of all, it's so good to see you back here at CyberSEED. Thank you for your walkthrough of what NIST has been up to. I want to go back a couple of slides when you talked about, I actually have two questions, but they're kind of embedded. When you talked about the software quality there, I think the broader sense around software quality also embeds the third-party risk and the whole supply chain, right?
Yes.
Because your advice to all of us is when you have a vendor sitting with you, ask the question, what sort of diligence have they applied to their process? So from that perspective, and kind of looking at everything that you have listed up there, wouldn't you think that it's less about security, it's more about security and privacy, which really hinges on the overall risk management?
Yes.
Right? Wouldn't that be the foundation of this whole thing? And how do we balance exactly. So yeah. I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
So when does security and privacy reinforce each other, and when do they actually create some tensions for one another? And with our work in security engineering and with our work, we have a security control catalog, 853, the most widely referenced NIST document, cybersecurity document. And actually that became the security and privacy control catalog with the new Rev 5 that came out about 3 months ago that starts to look at that balance and put privacy on par with security instead of a little bit as an afterthought.
Where did our mic person?
In your program list, some of the areas you've mentioned are healthcare, smart grid, and voting. Can you give us an idea of what kinds of problems, issues you are addressing?
In each one of those? Yeah, so in voting by statute, we were asked to work with the Electronic Assistance Commission to develop a next generation set of standards overall that would support voting. And not just, so it's security, it's interoperability, it's usability, it's a suite of things across NIST. And we have continued to do that, particularly in the security space. We've taken up the voting process overall and done a risk assessment at each phase to understand where putting things online helps and where the risk is much higher. So it's really about the voting process itself and the kinds of security controls that you'd put around that. Energy, with smart grid, looking at generation, distribution, use, and back to the home environment, so meter reading, that sort of thing. So we worked on a suite of standards that could be used for that, and we also looked at standards that were deployed across the grid and helped to improve those and add security features around them. So we did a lot of analysis of the IT versus the traditional OT kinds of standards and how we could bring those all in together.
I think I'm going to stop questions right there. If you have more questions, find Donna afterwards.
So, yes, and so the only other thing that I wanted to say, we are in the process of hiring cryptographers, and also particularly on the software quality side. I am interested in bringing in some students from different universities to help us as we look at some of the challenges there, as well as some of the challenges around cybersecurity education and the way it's managed today. So if you know folks, please send them my way. I thank you all very much.